Right now, I'm going to talk about being a positive woman in a relationship. Sometimes that can be really, really, really challenging. But in this video, I'm going to give you a lot of tools and strategies that can really, really, really help you with this endeavor. Welcome to Dr. K Speaks. I'm Dr. K, and I'm here to help you to navigate through the many challenges in your life's journey so that you might ultimately become the highest version of yourself. So that's right, I'm going to talk about how to be a positive woman in a relationship. And this video is for men too, because the tools and strategies that I'm going to be talking about helps us all. So now, first of all, how to be a positive person, period, in a relationship is you have to want to be positive. You can't do certain things to try and please another person, like I'm going to be positive so that this other person can respond to me in the ways that I want. Because what will happen is when that person doesn't respond to you in the ways that you want, then you won't keep up your end of the bargain with being positive. So you have to do it for yourself. You have to have an intention to want to be a positive person. Something that's very, very important is mindfulness. If you're working on being a positive person in a relationship, then you have to be mindful, meaning being aware. You got to be aware of your behaviors, and you also have to be aware of the thoughts that you focus on. Right now, I want to go into my book, I Rewired My Brain, My Journey to Freedom, and I'm going to go to the section on mindfulness, which is in chapter 29. Awareness is a must to create change in your life. You have to be aware of when you're focusing on stinking thinking. That's so important, because if you're focusing on stinking thinking, then you will not be able to be a positive woman or man in a relationship. You have to be aware of when you're focusing on stinking thinking so that you can implement strategies to deter your focus and eventually deactivate the habit of focusing on negativity. Awareness is also a must when working to download the habit of focusing on healthy and productive thoughts. In order for you to change, you're going to need some healthy and productive thoughts to focus on. So if you're working on being more positive than you already are now, then that means that you got some areas where you need to make some changes. And the book can help you make those changes because it has all kinds of tools and strategies, like I mentioned, to help you. Now, one of the things that makes it really, really, really challenging to stay positive. So say we got our intention, like, yes, okay, I want to be a positive person, period. And then you're working on being mindful. Something that can catch us all up are our triggers. And what are our triggers? Those triggers are our hot buttons. When somebody says something or does something, like your mate says or does something, and then it just gets you all fired up, and then it can instantly get you into a negative space. So when you have awareness, when you're working on being a positive person in a relationship, then you can have tools and strategies that you can implement during those times of when you get triggered to help you to move in a direction that you want to go in, which would be how to be more positive in a relationship. And in my book, I got a lot of tools and strategies. It's about rewiring your brain just to help you to be a more positive person, period. So now another thing that I want to talk about, which is so important, it's about reinterpreting your past. And I have a place in my book where there's a whole chapter where I wrote about reinterpreting your past. And why is this so important for ladies and men? So you've probably been in more than one relationship in your life. And if you've ever been in a relationship where you were hurt by that other person, something that they did, and it just devastated you or maybe hurt you to a point to where you have trust issues, you have to reinterpret your past. Because if you allow whatever happened in that past relationship just to stay in your mind as a negative experience, an unresolved issue, then that is going to subconsciously affect how you think about whoever the person is in front of you, and it's also going to affect your behaviors. So let me share with you a little bit about what reinterpreting your past is all about. In my other video, I talked about, it was two different videos actually. In the book reveal, I talked about my experience with my mother where she was mentally and emotionally abusive. And then I talked about my ex-husband who was mentally, emotionally abusive. He was also physically abusive and held sawed-off shotgun to my head and everything. So now, in order for me to move forward, to be a positive person, I had to make peace with that. In order for me to become the highest version of myself, I had to make peace with that. And how did I make peace with it? Well, I had to put a different meaning on the past because, see, everything that I went through and a lot of other women have gone through, being mentally and emotionally and even physically abused, it can cause you to have some real resistance to engaging in a relationship fully. So right now I'm going to talk about reinterpreting the past, and I'm going to be looking in my book, I Rewired My Brain, My Journey to Freedom. This reinterpretation is my current mindset about my mother. So remember, I was telling you how I did a video about how abusive my mother was, and she held a shotgun to me. And in order for me to move forward and get some peace so that I could even be a positive person, I had to work on reinterpreting that past, which means putting a different meaning on it. It didn't happen overnight. I had to work on myself. I had to not allow myself to focus on the thoughts of my mother that were negative. When the negative thoughts popped into my head, I made myself focus on the reinterpreted version of my past repeatedly until that mindset got wired into my brain. Now, what was that reinterpreted version of my past? Well, I couldn't take away the past because anything that happened in any of our past, we cannot change the past, right? So we can only reinterpret it. And how did I reinterpret my past? I looked at that situation from a higher perspective. My mother was doing all that she knew to do during those times when she was mentally and emotionally abusive and when she held the gun on me. At the time she held the gun on me, she was drunk and probably in some type of blackout state, right? Because what she was doing was self-medicating because of her own depression and her own issues, unresolved issues from her childhood. So when I realized that, wow, my mother's brain got wired just like my brain got wired, and she's operating from those programs, she didn't know how to change those programs, and she didn't seek out any kind of help to help her to deal with her depression and whatever else she was going through. She just self-medicated trying to help herself. And so in turn, what she ended up doing was putting a whole lot of negativity towards me. And at the end of the day, she did love me because she had a love language of being a great provider. So she did all that she knew to do. And when I reinterpreted that situation from that perspective, then that gave me peace with my mother, which in turn contributes to me being a positive person. Because I do know that regardless of whatever space somebody is operating from, whether they're being mentally and emotionally abusive to someone else, or even if they're the person who's being mentally and emotionally abused, they're all operating from their programs, because that's what we all do. Now, here is another short example of how I reinterpreted a different part of my past. My ex-husband was very abusive towards me. Like I had mentioned, he held the sawed-off shotgun at my head, and I talked about it in the other video. I used to believe that I was a helpless victim. This is getting good. How did I reinterpret that past? I learned that I am a powerful creator and that I made choices that led to my staying in that relationship and accepting the abuse. Now, let me say that again. I reinterpreted my past and dealing with my ex-husband and how abusive he was. I used to feel like I was a victim, a helpless victim. If I didn't reinterpret that past, then that victim consciousness would still be existing in my mind. And then it would make it really difficult for me to engage fully or in a positive manner in another relationship. Because number one, I wouldn't even be valuing myself, thinking that I'm just this helpless victim. And in turn, that other person that I'm with might not value me, right? So it's really important to know too, if you're working on being a positive person, you have to value yourself. So if you got some issues with valuing yourself, it's important to work on it. And you can work on it from rewiring your brain, because I went through some of the same stuff. So now, with my ex-husband and his mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive ways, the reason why I stayed in that relationship is because I wanted that marriage to work. I wanted my family situation. We had one kid together at one time, and then there was two, and then there was three. And I wanted the relationship to work. So that is why I stayed. Hence, I wasn't a victim. I made a choice to stay in that relationship because I was trying to do different things to change him, to change the dynamics in the relationship. And it's so important to know that you can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself. I mean, I used to do different things like back in the day before I was writing books about self-help books about how to help people in different situations. I was reading books back then, and then I would get to a good chapter in the book where I thought it might help him, and then I'd leave that chapter open and have it out somewhere on the table, hoping that he'd go by and look and say, oh, what is she reading? And then he was going to look at that and then bam, have some type of epiphany and realize that it wasn't a good thing to be mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive to me. And that didn't happen. So when I did leave the relationship, I made a conscious choice to leave the relationship because I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. Enough. So then I used my free will to no longer keep myself in that mental and emotional bondage in that relationship, having that kind of mindset that I had. I moved towards freedom because I realized that, hey, I can leave.